Question: who was the first person ever to be run over by a steam train and killed? Was it William Huskisson? Well, if you look it up in Google or sometimes in books, it usually says William Huskisson. But I can tell you it wasn't William Huskisson. Well, if it wasn't him, who was it? Or could it have been George Stevenson? He was run over and killed a full 15 days before William Huskisson. And what's more, his death was caused by a malicious act, which attracted a 200 guinea reward from a railway company if it led to a conviction. We'll talk about the unfortunate death of George Stevenson shortly. But first, William Huskisson. William Huskisson was born on the 11th of March in 1770. He was a British statesman, a financier, and an MP for many constituencies, including Liverpool. He was present, along with many other dignitaries, at the opening day of the Liverpool to Manchester Railway. Without going into too much detail about the opening day, that's for another time. On the 15th of September 1830, 8 locomotives set off from Liverpool to Manchester. On the south line, or right-hand side, was the Northumbrian locomotive, containing the Prime Minister, the Duke of Wellington. And on the north track were the other 7 locomotives. Setting off and going through the impressive Olive Mount cutting. Through the Skew Bridge at Rainhill, and then on to the Sankey Valley Viaduct. After about 17 miles, at a place called Parkside, there was a previously scheduled stop for all the engines to take on water. Many people, including William Huskisson and William Holmes, got down from the carriages and walked along the line, congratulating one another on such a great day. And when the engines Phoenix and North Star had completed taking on water, they resumed their journey, leaving that part of the track unoccupied for a moment. Huskisson and Holmes walked across the track in order to greet the Prime Minister. But just as the Prime Minister leaned from his carriage and shook the hand of Huskisson, several people cried out to warn of the approaching rocket on the North Line. People on the tracks immediately scrambled for safety. Holmes squeezed himself up to the carriage as closely as he could. Huskisson panicked. He tried to get across the tracks, changed his mind, came back, and at the last minute tried to get in through an open door in the carriage. The engine probably hit the door as he was climbing in, knocking him to the ground, and the wheels went over his left leg and his thigh. Joseph Locke, the driver of the rocket at the time, immediately put the gear lever into reverse, which was the only way to stop the train in those days. They had no brakes. Of course, this was too late because Huskisson couldn't pull his leg back in time. He was taken to the vicarage at Eccles, where he was looked after, but later that evening he died of his injuries. He was laid to rest in St. James's Cemetery, which had only just opened the year before. Both the cemetery and Huskisson's mausoleum were both designed by John Foster Jr. On this plinth used to be a statue, removed from here in the 1960s when vandalism threatened its safety. Sculpted by John Gibson in marble, there were 2 further copies made of this statue, one also in marble, commissioned by his wife Eliza. Originally meant to go inside the customs house, but he never did go there. Eventually it was erected in Pimlico Gardens in London, where it still stands today. The second copy was in bronze, also commissioned to go outside the Customs House, which it did, but when the Customs House was demolished, it was removed up to Prince's Avenue, and being removed once again in the 80s to its present position on Duke's Terrace. So going back then to George Stevenson, well, he was killed on a Wednesday, the 1st of September 1830, 15 days before William Huskisson. Whilst doing research on the railway, I came across this story in the local papers about a fatal accident on the railway. George Stevenson, not to be confused with the famous engineer George Stevenson, was born in County Durham and was the fifth born in a family of 10 children. On the Wednesday, the 1st of September 1830, he was working on the Roby embankment. Mr. Stevenson was riding on the engine called Arrow, which was pulling 5 coaches laden with rubbish. Whilst coming up to a part of the track where there was a junction to another line, it was found that the position of a switch or junction rail had been changed. This led to a violent collision, causing Mr. Stevenson to jump off the engine, and in doing so, the engine and the carriages passed over him, killing him instantly. According to the local papers, his mangled remains were taken to the Old Swan Inn. Mr. Stevenson was 33 at the time and living on Edge Lane, Liverpool. He was laid to rest at the Necropolis at Low Hill in Everton. So it seems it wasn't an accident at all. The directors of the railway offered a 200 guinea reward for information that would lead to a conviction. The fact that Huskisson went down in history as being the first is totally down to his status as an MP and all. But guess what? Even George Stevenson wasn't the first. So, who was the first person to be run over by a steam train? Well, one man was killed a year before, on the 4th of September 1829. He'd got himself in front of a steam locomotive that was working the same Liverpool to Manchester railway line in Salford. One of his legs was completely severed. They took him to a nearby surgery, but couldn't stop the bleeding. Even before this, on the 5th of December 1821, a carpenter named David Brooke was walking home from Leeds in Yorkshire on the Middleton Railway when he was run over and killed by the engine of a coal train. There were many more railway-related accidents, but the question was, who was the first to be run over and killed by a steam train? Well, the first one I can find recorded was in 1813 on the same Middleton Railway in Leeds. A 13-year-old boy called John Bruce was running alongside the tracks when he was fatally struck by a moving steam locomotive. So the answer to the question of who was the first person ever to be run over by a steam train and killed is just maybe the young lad on the Middleton Railway, John Bruce.